Warning, this podcast definitely has spoilers, along with foul language. Don't say we didn't warn you. Hello and welcome. I'm your host today, Kalisa, and this is She Made Me Play, a podcast where we choose an RPG that one of us has played and the other hasn't and force the other to play it. We will then discuss the game from both angles of never had played the game before and playing the game again. Joining me is my partner in crime, the Western RPG to my JRPG, Pure. I am still shocked that you had never played this one, but are you ready to tell everyone what I made you play?
Absolutely. I am absolutely ready to tell everyone why I haven't played this and what I've thought about it. But maybe you should tell them a little bit about the format of our show first.
Go ahead. I think I just did.
Okay, so what we're doing, well, about the 10 hours. So we haven't finished the game. But what we've done is we've both given a good taste of the game. So this is my very first taste of the game that Kalisa has chosen for us, Final Fantasy VI. And we both played it for 10 hours in preparation for this podcast.
And some background information about the game. The game was first released in the US on October 11th, 1994 on Super Nintendo. It came out actually titled Final Fantasy III, which, could get a little confusing, but it's officially Final Fantasy VI. It's actually launched a bunch of times since then. It launched again on PlayStation 1 under Final Fantasy Anthology in 1999, which I played both versions, the Super NES and the PlayStation 1 version. Yes, major geek. It was later released again on Game Boy Advance in 2007 and Android and iOS in 2014. And finally, Steam on 2015. But the Steam one was just a mobile port, which we'll probably get into because there was a lot of controversy around that.
Okay, so first of all, let me explain myself as to why I haven't played this.
Yeah, you better have a good excuse.
I do consider myself an RPG fan, as I have a ton of games that I have played that I know you haven't. But in 1994, I was in my senior year of high school, and I was about ready to go to college.
I was 12.
Yeah. I understand. You're obviously much younger than I am. But when I was going to college, the other thing that was going to happen is that the Sony PlayStation was just about to launch. So I was super excited about all the cool new stuff that the PlayStation was going to have. So it was really difficult for me to really dig into a Super Nintendo game. And someday when we see this in the future, when we talk about Final Fantasy IX, we're going to see the exact same thing happen again. But it was right on the edge of a console generation. And this is something that I've had a history of doing, is ignoring games at the very end of a console life cycle. And I've finally overcome it in the last couple of years. But that is why I didn't play Final Fantasy VI at the time. Now, I've heard tons of things about it since then, obviously. People have talked about it, you've talked about it, and
I've complained to you definitely a lot and that you've never played it.
I've owned it for many, many years in many different versions. I was a store manager and district manager for EB Games in the early 2000s. So I actually remember seeing the Final Fantasy Anthology or Final Fantasy Chronicles, I can't remember which one it was, with this game inside it come into my store, and I bought it. And it stayed on my shelf at home until I sold it without even opening up the plastic.
Tragic. You just made a lot of enemies now, and we just started. How does it feel? In my defense,
I have no defense. I probably should have played it back in the early 2000s at least, if I didn't play it when it originally came out. But I did take the time to play it now. So at least that's what this podcast is about. It's about...
Yeah, I twisted your arm to finally play the best Final Fantasy game ever made.
When the situation is reversed. So the best Final Fantasy game ever made... I think that's a little overgenerous, but that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yep. And
So,
what
when
version
you told
did you
me
play?
that this was going to be the first game that we played, I thought it was a great game to play to be our first game because it obviously is super popular. It's obviously well regarded. But I Googled it, and this is a whole fucking issue. I was shocked that there was so much debate about which is the best version. And the funny thing is, there's a consensus that there is no definitive version, which is something that's really unique to this game. A lot of people say, well, this is the version you have to play of a certain game because it has everything. There is no such version in this, and there's debate back and forth about which is the best version. So I don't know if you heard this, but the Super Nintendo version, the translation is really well loved by fans, but unfortunately the original translator on the SNES version had to truncate some of the script because there wasn't enough storage on the Super Nintendo cartridge. So he was given the Japanese script, he wrote the English script, and it was too long to fit on the cartridge because they were right up against the limitations of it. So he actually had to cut entire lines out to make it fit. So I thought, I don't want to play the Super Nintendo version. And then so a lot of people recommended the GBA version. But unfortunately, even though the GBA has a ton more storage than the Super Nintendo, the GBA doesn't have a proper sound chip. So the sounds have to be stored as digital audio, and they had to sample the sound at a really low bit rate to fit on a GBA cartridge. So the GBA version has issues. So I actually went and I downloaded the Android version and I played that, but I did also download the GBA version on my tablet and I compared the two. And I actually asked you which version I should play because the GBA version was really cool and it looked good with this unique kind of, obviously pixel art. And it sounded good. It didn't sound amazing. And I went back and forth between the two. I actually played through the first 30 minutes on both versions to see which one was going to be the one I went with. But ultimately, the thing which put me over the top, and this will probably be a reoccurring theme on this podcast, is that I went with the Android version because it had an auto battle feature, which I found to make it much easier to get through some of the combat and much less painful. Yes, because I am lazy. And wait,
Very
but
lazy.
you say I'm lazy. Which version did you play?
Well, sadly, I was thinking of regular Super NES version emulated, but I looked in my Steam library and saw that I already had bought it. So I actually played the Steam version using an Xbox controller. And I'm curious, what did you think of the pixel character models and their graphics in the party screen?
Let me see how I can phrase this properly. I really, really liked some of them. I really didn't like others of them. I thought it was really strange that they're all in these kind of like sideways profile views. It doesn't seem like a normal way to do artwork like that. Like, why would you do it on the side? Why wouldn't you do more of a head-on view? But I thought the party screen graphics and like the character graphics when they're talking were really good. I thought the actual sprites, while at first I hated them. I absolutely hated them when I first saw them. Which is exactly why I wanted to play the GBA version. I thought the GBA version sprites were definitively better, but I got used to them. And after a little bit of the time, I found them to be actually quite endearing. And now going back, if I looked at the GBA sprites, I think it would be difficult to say that they were better after getting used to the newer sprites. But they were very, very different.
I have to agree with that, but to your point of the weird angles, I actually didn't remember that because again, the first time I played this game, I was about 12 years old. Then I played it again when it came out in 1999. I guess the one that really struck me is Edgar. Did he really look that freaking goofy? And I looked back and I Googled like original Super NES Final Fantasy VI character models and specifically the party screen. And yeah, he did look that goofy. So I was a little bit of my childhood was, crushed from me because I guess the glasses of a young child, I thought they looked better.
Because I actually, when I played it, I assumed that these were totally new graphics that were redrawn for later versions, like maybe the anthology or maybe it was just redone for the Android version or the mobile version. And hearing that that's basically how they were all along, obviously just more pixelated, was pretty surprising.
Yeah, I mean, the angles that I noticed of the characters and their poses were very similar to the original version. Just It does look like they redrew them, but they redrew them with the same like angles and I guess dumb look on their face that I didn't notice when they were so pixelated. So that was a weird wake up call for me. That's for damn sure.
Something you treasured as a child, as I'm sure that's going to happen in future episodes when the situation's reversed. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing everything through new eyes.
Well, at least something stayed the same. I still have a huge pixel crush on Locke. Locke was my man, even when I was a little girl. He still is. He's a player.
Oh my God, Locke.
But he's a cool player.
Locke, you know how I described Locke after playing my 10 hours of Final Fantasy VI? Locke is like the meat puppet who just fucking gets beat on all the time. Locke he's my official floor inspector in the party. I don't know what it is about his fucking face that enemies just want to smash it. But he died. He definitely died. It's not even close. He definitely died more than everyone else in the party combined. Easily. Maybe 2 or 3 times more than everyone else combined. It's fucking ridiculous.
So, speaking of party, which 4 characters on average did you use more? Now, I know some characters you couldn't use due to story elements, but which ones did you like the best and which ones would you rather have in your party?
Terra is super cute. I think she's so adorable. I wanted to just huggle her. So I had her in my party, of course, every single time I could. Other than that, I think that Edgar was amazing and I loved using his tools. So I was always looking to have him in my party. I loved his auto crossbow and his bio blaster and then his drill for bosses and things like that. So definitely Edgar was one that I used a lot. Other than that, Terra, Edgar, probably Locke, but for his steal ability, because I really love to steal things from the enemies because I was using quite a bit of potions at points in the game. So it was nice to not have to do all that myself. Or have to buy all those myself. And then beyond that, it was probably Sabin when available because his blitz attacks were really incredible. Especially his, I forget what it's called, the Rising Phoenix or whatever, where he does fire to everyone. I really like that because it hits everyone.
Now, speaking of blitz abilities, how easy did you find it to do those blitz abilities used in the Android version?
I actually didn't mostly use the touchscreen. I have an 8-bit DOE SF30 Pro controller, which is, if anyone looks it up, it's like the best and it's a Super Nintendo style controller for Android, and it works fantastically with both emulation and official Android games. So I use that, and because of that, with my Street Fighter background, because I was playing Street Fighter in the arcades when you were 6 years old, I didn't have any problem doing any of his moves. But I was able to do them a couple of times from the touchscreen, which I did when I was traveling. And then once you do it once, then if you auto battle, when I found out that if you auto battle, it automatically does the last blitz you did without having to punch it in. That was probably the majority of the blitzes I did.
That is hacks.
You didn't have auto battle in your Steam version?
No, I didn't.
It was the little arrows in the upper left-hand corner.
I didn't see it. Yeah. Well, how was I going to touch them? I mean, from what I found, using the Steam version with the controller, I thought the controller was kind of wonky, the controls. I mean, I used an Xbox controller, which I usually do, but it seemed to not be very responsive, especially in the menus. I mean, for example, there's undead enemies in almost every Final Fantasy game, and a really good ability is cast and raise or use a Phoenix down on them. I couldn't figure out for the life of me, using the Steam version of the game and a controller, how the hell to focus on the enemies to use raise on them.
I can't believe you're saying that, because my first response is just to try every button. And I quickly found out that at least on the Android version, I could use the right button on Super Nintendo. I could use that to toggle between like just casting Cure on one person and Cure on my whole party. And then I could use the Y button to toggle between myself and the enemies.
For some reason, it wasn't working for me, or I was too stupid to try it out.
I was too stupid to know that you could. I mean, now that you mention it, I remember being able to do that in Final Fantasy V, which I did play because that was in the meat of the console cycle. But I never did it in this game. I had totally forgotten about that.
Yeah, I mean, a few times I tried to do it and I'm like, screw this. But I mean, the controller experience to me overall was just laggy, it felt like, and non-responsive. It was pretty painful for my 10 hours, even though I absolutely love this game.
Wow,
which was painful.
That's surprising to hear. I did have control issues throughout the game, but most of it for me was not navigating the menus, but navigating the world. And boy, I found navigating the world to be such an annoyance. It made me want to throw my controller sometimes.
I felt that too, especially not the world per se, but when you're going through little passages in the caves, it felt like no matter where you moved the controller, your character was too stupid and just face planted into a wall.
It was really difficult to like navigate down a single tile corridor because I would go like diagonally and then I wouldn't go and it would get stuck on the corner. And then beyond that, when I had the sprint shoes on, it was like I'd overshoot and I'd move around and I wouldn't be able to get where I wanted to go. And then when I took the sprint shoes off, like when they changed characters on me and the character didn't have the sprint shoes, I'd be like, oh my God, it's so painfully slow.
Wasn't it painful?
I almost thought, like, how can a game be designed where the main character is this slow? And then you put the sprint shows on and you're like, I wish it was just a little slower.
Yeah, that should have just been, this is how fast the character is, screw the sprint shoes.
15% slower. And then the other navigation problem that I really had was that the perspective was difficult to understand what was going on. There were places where I could walk under things, and because it was like 3D, and you could go like behind the building.
Oh yeah, definitely. I noticed that too.
Bridges and stuff that didn't necessarily look like a bridge. And okay, that was fine. It was fine until they made that a mechanic, where that was like part of the challenge, is that you had to find hidden things. And I'm talking specifically about when you're playing as Locke, trying to get out of I forget what they called it, like out of the city, lock scenario where you're trying to sneak around and get through the building and get out. And I didn't have sprint shoes and I was trying to go through all these places and it wasn't even immediately obvious what the hell I had to do. Because I kept trying to go through places. It's like, oh, you can't walk through here. Oh, but this is an open thing. You didn't know though, because it was all just solid.
I was actually going to ask you about that. I have it in my notes specifically. During Locke's scenario, how long did it take you to figure out that you had to steal from the merchants and then the soldiers in order to get around?
It wasn't that bad at all for me because I stole everything. I stole everything from everyone the entire game. So even when I was just playing with Locke, it's like my first instinct, oh, just steal. Obviously steal. Because I don't know, he might have a high potion or something that I want. So the first action I did was steal on every single enemy the entire game. And boy, when I got the mug ability, I was super excited because then I could steal and do damage at the same time.
Yeah, that definitely made him pretty awesome. He was actually one of my main party members in every version I played, probably until the end. So obviously, Pixel Crush and all. He was my man.
I did not see that. I did not. I thought he was just underpowered and he was cool because he stole. But other than the stealing, he really had nothing that was good. He just did shitty damage and just fucking ate floor the whole game because I don't know what it is. He was lower level at sometimes, but I would really focus on getting his level up. I did a lot of grinding in this game. I was grinding all the time. Whenever things got difficult at all, I would grind. But I would grind for Locke. Because I would be like, oh shit, Locke has only 300 hit points. He keeps dying all the time. Let's grind him up to 400 hit points. And so I would grind just to get Locke higher so he didn't eat so much floor. And it was really unfortunate that the whole game was about, in combat, I would just scan their hit points as it's auto-battling, of course. And the only one I looked at was Locke. And we're like, oh, please don't hit Locke. Because I know they'll hit Locke, and then someone will do an attack that does damage to everyone, and then Locke's going to die.
You do know you could have put him in the back row.
Yeah, I saw that back row thing, and it said, like, it does half damage or whatever. I'm like, I don't want to do half damage. He's an adventurer, or whatever he is.
You were stealing with him, so what did you care?
He should be tougher than he was. I had everyone else in my front row. So he was in the front row, too. Come on. He's not that bad.
I guess just his whole story and everything, he was really always endearing to me. So, I mean, he definitely wasn't that weak to me, especially when he got the boomerang type weapons that he was able to do the same damage in the back row.
Oh.
I mean,
so
he
I
became
found
really...
one of those, and I saw him, like, throw it, and I didn't realize that he would be able to do that much damage from the back row. So that would make me think differently, probably.
Yeah. But, I mean, besides Locke, definitely Tara and Celeste are some of my probably top 2 female characters of all times. I mean, especially playing them as a 12-year-old when I started, and having these 2 kind of badass female characters as the quote-unquote main characters in the game was pretty awesome to me. And I probably just spoiled a little for you because you didn't get as far as I did in the 10 hours, did you?
I got to just after... We rescued the Espers from the Magitech factory, and I saw Tara's backstory, her flashback, and I thought that was really cool. But I understand that Celeste is not gone forever.
Celeste.
So she's going to be coming back. I mean, that was made it pretty clear. I thought they were both really good characters and both very interesting, but I can't go any further without talking just generally about female representation in this game. I know this game came out in 1994. I get it. But looking at it, it's painful. The number of, people in town, shopkeepers, they're all men. Anyone who has any type of authority is a man. All the soldiers are men. And I get it. That's how things were back then.
Hey, in defense of the soldiers, they had full armor on, kind of like the stormtroopers in, Star Wars. How do you know
you're right.
who's a man and
but
who's a female?
You know that they were all men.
Well, that's the Empire's fault. We're fighting to free the
absolutely.
world
It's
from
just
the Emperor.
After playing a more modern game, like I was just playing last week, The Outer Worlds, and it's very distributed and much more realistic experience. In Final Fantasy VI, the girls are basically relegated to just walking around town or being dancers or barmaids or things like that. I know that's just how it was all the time back then, and it's not a big deal, but it's just shocking seeing that coming back.
Well, if you think about it in the other end, the other females besides the barkeeps, the dancers, and the chicks just walking around town are saving the effing world.
Yeah, but they're just 2 of the however many people are saving the world. I don't know how many are in the total party.
You think there's just 2.
There's just
but you didn't get
so
that
far. But it's not like it's 50%. But that doesn't matter. I can understand how, the story-based characters. I'm just making a comment about the larger world.
No, true. I can see that now. Obviously, when I first played it, I didn't notice it. As I played it now, I just always thought that half the people in the full set of armors were chicks anyway.
I mean, obviously
so I was
that's
all good.
kind of how that's kind of how it would have to be, right? But because I've played so many other games more recently, it definitely stuck out at me as something that was different. Because especially, I'm trying to think. There was a game I played recently where it was really obvious that there were a lot of female enemies of the same types. I can't remember.
I don't either. Probably because I didn't play it.
Yeah. So anyways, you have to, and you also cannot talk about this game without talking about the fact that, come on, JRPG and Amnesia? Are you fucking kidding me?
That's an anime trope too,
Christ.
So come on.
That, as soon as I saw that, I was like, really? Didn't we just play games like that?
But if you think about it more, especially now that you've seen her backstory, how could she have had amnesia? The Emperor found her when she was
how could she get it back?
2?
I guess she got it back when she got her dad's soul in the stone or whatever.
Yeah, but how could she have remembered any of that?
You're
but
right.
anyways, yeah. Story
that totally
elements
makes
aside.
sense now that I think about it like that.
Yeah, so, but whatever.
Speaking of that, in the beginning of the game, right, when I first started, the first enemies I saw them before I entered combat. I was like, oh, this is really cool. This is one of those games that you get to see the enemies first, and then that stopped.
Yeah, that was just
it happened
story
intermittently
elements,
when it was like a story boss or something like that, but it definitely was not throughout the entire game. So that was really disappointing for me. Other than that, I really enjoyed the minimap. The minimap was just fantastic in the overworld, and it really helped me to navigate through the world. I love that I could make it larger so I could see much further away on the minimap. I just really wish it worked in dungeons. Spent a lot of time being lost in dungeons. Probably one of the biggest reasons why you got further than I did was because because I got lost so often in the dungeons.
And I knew exactly where to go. It was almost like muscle memory for me. I knew where to go, what to do, who to talk to, and I guess I was more trying to see how far I could get. So I wasn't exploring as much, but I also knew some of the secrets. Like when the cave you go through between Figaro, and I'm probably saying that incorrectly and people are going to probably email us, and Selfagaro when Tara, Locke, and Edgar run away. That cave there, Locke visits again with Celeste. If you do not open the chests, later on in the game, near the end, you go back there and the items are much better when you open it then. It's like the items in certain areas in the game age.
I had no idea about that. And yeah, I just kind of wandered around. So I don't know if there's places that I didn't go to and there's places that I did go to. I guess I was just trying to figure stuff out, but I cannot talk about exploration without talking about the combat. Because the combat and the exploration are like hand in hand. There was too much random combat.
1-step combat, 2-step combat. It was painful how often. I mean, I didn't even have to move, and I just turn my character around. It's like combat, 1-step combat. I'm like, oh my God. I don't, but it's tough to say what you remember and what you don't, because like I said, kid glasses or fond memory glasses. I imagine the combat hasn't
obviously
changed much.
I don't think they changed it. I was just wondering how it felt to you going back to it, because to me, now, like I said, I've played other games just like this of around the same time period, and I remembered it being bad. I didn't remember it being this bad, at least in Final Fantasy. There are games which I've played which I know were worse with more combat, but I thought this was absolutely way too much. And then my worst part about the combat was that the difficulty is tremendously uneven. I found that some combats were just a snooze fest because you do the Rising Phoenix and everyone's dead, or you do the auto crossbow and everything's dead. And then just 20 minutes later, after one story thing, I have literally died 3 times in the first combat where I got out of town after a story element. I would walk and I would get a random combat and they would fucking kill me. My entire party. Because I just had it set to auto battle and I don't know. It's just another mob, right? The mobs which I just have been auto battling for the past hour without even thinking about it. And now the next battle with the same auto battle, suddenly they just kill me. Because they do so much more damage.
That's because you're lazy.
I was auto-battling because it was a snooze fest to fight.
How many times did you die total? How many times did I wipe
and the whole party die? I think 4 times. It may be more because that's 4? Discounting the first time I met the fucking ugly octopus in the waterfall. So
Ultros?
And in another, F this game moment, the waterfall sequence, I went around and around and around. I'm like, I don't know where the fuck I'm going, right? So
muscle memory. I figured it out right away. I have no muscle memory.
So I went to the old school D&D RPG rule and I did the left-hand rule and I went left and then I went left and I found some stuff and I fought some guys and I saved and then I went left and I went left and I fought some more people and then I got to a save point and I'm like, oh, huh. And for some reason, I saved it in a different slot. And thank God that I did, because after that save point took me directly to the octopus. And he just killed my whole party easily. So I didn't know what to do. So I tried fighting him. I was like, wow, how is this so hard? I get that he's like some kind of boss. But how is this so hard after all these other combats were just so easy? So I tried 6 times to beat him. And I could not beat him. So I thought, well, I've got that other save. So I did that other save and I went right at the next turn and was able to loop back around to that same save point. I did that loop 20 times because I realized that after I did that loop, I couldn't go back to that save point. So I'd only get 1 shot to go back and save before the octopus. but I wouldn't get to regrind. So I said, and I looked at Locke, and I said, okay, Locke, you've got to have 400 hit points before we go and fight the octopus. Because he was doing the tail thing and doing like 300 and whatever. So I got to make sure you can live through one hit of the tail thing. So I did. And I ground out probably, I don't know, I think of things in terms of Locke levels, because he was the meat puppet. But I probably ground out 4 Locke levels there, just going around and around and around in a circle. Fun times.
You know, funny story. In the raft sequence, I actually died on the first combat when I entered the raft because those pterodactyl-looking enemies, when it first started, they did this fireball attack on my whole party. Oh, yeah,
and then I forgot,
everyone.
In the, now that you mention it, in the waterfall sequence, if Bannon dies, it's just fucking game over. Yeah,
well, that's why he has a free heal. You put him in the back row and just keep
mentioning this rose thing. This thing just went right over my head. I did not use the rose. There was one time when I was selecting people in my party and I clicked it again and it like moved him like a little bit. I'm like, oh yeah, they're a rose. Oh well. And I move him back to the front row.
So we're going to skip back a little. After Tara, Locke, and Edgar fled Figaro, did you happen to see the small scene in combat when Tara uses magic?
That was amazing.
Or did you miss that?
I absolutely love that. That was one of my very favorite scenes in the entire game. I loved it because it represented for me, I actually stopped and looked at that scene. I'm like, wow, this really is the same exact company and team that made Final Fantasy VII. And it looked like this game, at least from then on, proceeded to really reinforce for me how this was truly the predecessor of Final Fantasy VII, just without the graphics. It had all the same kinds of cutscene moments and dramatic moments in, hiding behind the boxes when Kefka's talking and watching things happen from the scenes. It had lots of really great story moments that were integrated into the gameplay. And not just like static cutscenes. And I thought that was one of the first ones that really stuck out to me. Because they were like, oh my God, you're using magic? And they had this big conversation in the middle of combat, which felt really modern to me from a game this old.
Yeah, I also thought it was interesting too. And obviously replaying it, I knew a lot of where those quote unquote secret cutscenes were. And it made me wonder, there was a lot of really great missed story elements. If you went by a place, if you didn't go into a certain area, if you didn't stay at a certain inn, if you didn't have the certain team of characters with you, there were just great moments that you could miss throughout the entire game. Like another example was in South Figaro. I mean, we're just going in the beginning now. Did you go into the bar and talk to Shadow? And did you go to visit Sabin's house before you went to the mountains?
Sabin's house. I did not know he had a house.
Yeah, he actually had a house kind of to the little bit to the left, north of South Figaro, that if you went in there, you had a scene with Edgar. I
definitely haven't seen that.
Yeah, and some of the other ones that I can think of off the top of my head, take into account where you are right now, where you ended. There's also a scene, I forget what town it's called, but if you have Locke and Celeste, you go into this room and there's a sleeping girl in a bed. And there's a great scene between Locke, kind of Celeste, and this girl. And you find out that she's the reason why Locke is so protective of Tara and Celeste. Because she's his sleeping beauty.
I did find that. And now I can see why he's your special pixel crush.
Yeah, I'm a romantic at heart. What can I say? But some of the other things I thought really interesting playing 3 versions of the game now was, did you know that in the PlayStation 1 version, there was actually CGI cutscene in the very beginning of the game that is not in the mobile or Steam version.
And of course, I just assumed that it was in those other versions. And I kept kind of like waiting for it. And I'm like, wait. And then I thought, well, maybe I misheard. Maybe the cutscene is in the opera scene. And then I saw that. I'm like, I guess it wasn't. So I had heard about that in the remastered version, but I've never actually seen it. So probably after we do this, I'm going to go YouTube it now that you remind me of it.
I YouTubed it. The graphics are not very kind.
It's pretty
anymore.
rough.
It's probably why they left it out.
It's pretty rough when it's a CGI scene and it's like way worse than just regular graphics now. So yeah, I can definitely understand that.
Yeah, it's pretty blurry vision. It was a challenge to watch it, but it brought fond memories back, so it was okay. Another big change I noticed, and we did talk about it a little, Sabin's Blitz is so much easier in the Steam mobile version. Because in the Super Nintendo version, and I'm pretty sure the PlayStation version too, when you hit Blitz, you didn't see those arrows on the screen. You had to guess and hope you were doing it right.
That definitely is unfair. But then at the same time, is on the Super Nintendo, if I knew the symbols and I had like my Nintendo Power Out or whatever, looking at the codes, I would never mess those up. Come on. That's just like Yoga Flame or whatever.
How old were you when it came out on Super Nintendo? I was freaking 12. I failed at those. I could do the pummel.
I was like 17, 18. So it was pretty easy.
Yeah, we won't get into this about them being, they're so easy. I'm a Street Fighter genius, bro.
Now I'm terrible at Street Fighter because, I'm old.
Yeah, you're
But
old.
when I was 12, I was really good at Street Fighter.
I think that's pretty much it about what's different. Playing it back, though, one of the things that kind of stood out to me a little was having to choose the scenario, or at least which order. Halfway through the raft scene, when Sabin disappears, you get to choose between, Locke's story, or Terra's story, continuation, or Sabin's. Have you ever seen an RPG around that time that did that? I mean, granted, you had to do them all, but it was kind of nice that you got to pick which order you did it in.
I'm trying to think of any RPG that I've ever seen that has had something similar. And I thought it was really innovative. I mean, that brings me back to the fact that a lot of the elements of this game were shockingly modern. I couldn't believe how modern it was for the cutscenes in combat. For all of these things combined, I was just like, wow. This is really impressive. I just thought of one. Octopath Traveler, which I played recently, definitely had that same thing, but only from the very beginning, where you could start anywhere you wanted. But this game was really ahead of its time, even though I talked about its representation and stuff like that. Yeah, whatever. But in terms of gameplay, it was really innovative ahead of its time in lots of ways. But then you look at things like the combat, which was not innovative at all. The combat was really old school.
The combat was its time, I played a lot of RPGs, Super Nintendo, that
I could
same
have
combat,
really gone for a better
characters.
Combat system. Not to compare too much to Octopath Traveler, but obviously it's a Square game that I just played. Octopath Traveler's combat is, for the most part, much longer, and that's bad in its own way, but it's much more interesting. There are strategies and things like that make the combat more fun, whereas this combat's just like, okay, just do the thing.
It's a newer game, and I know we're probably going to do that on the podcast eventually, too.
Have you played Octopath Traveler, Miss JRPG?
No, I haven't, but we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about Final Fantasy VI, so don't go off in a tangent. Okay. You can get me later. We're talking about, anyway.
So speaking of the combat, there's a couple of more nitpickles that I have. Okay, so and this is something that I think just was like banned in Japan after the year 2000, because it totally stopped happening, but when you get poisoned in combat and then you have to walk around and take poison damage.
Oh, that was so annoying.
That is how does this add fun to any game? Like, we're out of combat. Status effects should go away.
Hey, I'm sorry, but in D&D, your status effect frickin' stays until you get rid of it. I don't know what you're talking about.
It depends on the spell. Blindness does not stay.
It depends on our DM, who's a jerk that I'm looking at anyways.
Okay.
Speaking of off in a tangent.
But so poison, blindness,
that
all that
annoying.
stuff should not persist out of combat. It's just
Petrification does too.
Yeah, it doesn't add any fun.
No, it doesn't. Especially when your character's blind and it's like, oh, I don't have anything to cure blindness. No.
Yeah, I always made sure that every time I went to town, I had at least 10 of any of the status effect things that they gave me. So I was always making sure that I capped out, or not capped out, but had something ready for all of those types of possibilities. Although I couldn't afford the remedies, they were way too expensive for me.
Yeah, they were. It's nice when you finally can use magic to clear that crap. Oh,
yeah, absolutely. And I was in process of learning that. You haven't got that far yet. No. I'm in process of learning that right now. I guess I was going to say on Celis, but she's gone. So someone else it's going to be Edgar, who's going to be my kind of healer until one of the girls comes
I
back.
actually decided not to use Edgar because his machinery weapons are just so face melty that I'd rather someone else be the healer.
Oh yeah, it was absolutely going to be Locke, except he's fucking dead. So it doesn't matter. He's not going to help me if he's dead. And Edgar's always in my party because his machinery weapons are so good. His bioblaster and his auto crossbow that he's always at least going to be there and be alive. So I figured he was the first person to learn that.
So I noticed you mentioned a lot about the auto crossbow and bioblaster, and knowing where you left off, you just saw Tara's cutscene, so you're in Zozo. Did you find the chainsaw?
I absolutely did not find the chainsaw.
Oh,
Again,
painful.
Talking about exploration, Zozo was so difficult to figure my way around. They did a lot of the perspective tricks and things like that, and then you're getting attacked like every 5 steps. So it was very difficult to explore in this game because I felt like I got punished for exploring, and it just made it more difficult, especially in the parts where the combat was super easy. So I would be able to beat it and I would get almost no experience, but I'd still have these combats every couple of seconds.
It's just painful to know that you went to the facility without the chainsaw. That makes Edgar a more beast than he already is. So, if you decide to keep playing the game, you gotta find the chainsaw in Zozo. It's really worth it. He even has this ability with the chainsaw where he puts on a Jason mask and he has like an insta-kill ability with it. It's pretty awesome.
Wow, that does sound pretty
awesome.
good, actually.
It does so much damage. It's ridiculous.
That's definitely the type of thing I could get behind, so I can totally understand that.
I think in my notes here it says Edgar chainsaw beast mode activated.
Yeah, it was just so difficult with all the combat to feel the freedom to explore. And when I got to the Magitech factory, that was like the pinnacle of both the combat all the time, plus the things that didn't make any sense, plus the perspective games. And it's so painful because I am so divided on this game. I loved many moments of it. I loved the story. I loved the combat against the bosses. I just wish there was less combat. I wish that it was more clear in the dungeons where exactly I was going. And when I had to go like behind something or through a tube or, give a perfect example of the kind of nonsense I'm talking about. In the Magitech factory, there's this hook going back and forth, right?
Yep.
I walked up to that hook and I'm like pushing the button. I'm like, well, maybe I have to like push towards it and push the button. I push towards it and push the button.
Yeah, to be at the right pixel. I get that.
It wasn't even that. It didn't work from that side. But later on, when you get to the other side of that same hook and the same thing, you jump right across. And it was like, why does it work one way and not the other way? I get that that's how they designed it, but it could have been more clear on what I was supposed to do.
That's true. But I think it's also games at that time, they didn't explain much at all. They kind of just threw you into the lion's den and expected you to figure it out. I think we're a little spoiled with games nowadays that there's tutorials for everything. They're a little easier and, but I get it. If I didn't know what to do or where to go, I would probably feel the same way you did.
Yeah, absolutely. Another example is when I was in the castle, the burrowing castle, and they're like, okay, we got to go do this thing to make the castle burrow. And I'm like, what do I do? They just leave me as Edgar just wandering around the castle. I have no idea what to do. Thankfully, I had the Android version has a tip guide where you can push a button and get a tip. I don't know if the Steam version had the same thing.
I don't know. I never looked.
I used it several times and it didn't help in that situation. It's just like, use the castle to go underneath. I'm like, yeah, thanks. But where? And there were many times in the game where I didn't know what exactly I was supposed to do. And it wasn't like, you have to go do this thing and rescue this person or, find this treasure in this cave. It's like, no, I need to do something specific to trigger a cutscene or to trigger a story moment. And it was frustrating because, I didn't realize I had to just go talk to this person over here where I thought, I'm going to the engine room and all this stuff. And again, I found like the castle really hard to navigate just because of the way the graphics were and the doors and everything. There were doors in the castle which I didn't see until the third time I walked past them, just because of how the graphics design was. Now, I know that there's definitely some debate on the version influence, because some people say that the redone graphics in the high-res versions, the mobile and Steam versions, didn't make that kind of thing as clear, but it was definitely difficult to find things a lot of the time.
Yeah. Speaking of getting lost in Figaro, did you see the coin flip scene between Sabin and Edgar?
Yeah, absolutely. Coin flip scene between Sabin and Edgar. I saw a coin flip scene between Setzler and the rest of the party, but I did not see one with Sabin and Edgar. I don't think so.
Yeah, then I guess you wouldn't understand what they kind of meant with the Setzler scene, which is interesting. When you were looking to go underground in Figaro Castle, if you have Sabin and Edgar in your party, you can go to a place and have a scene where you find out that after their father died, Edgar flipped that coin in order to be king so Sabin could be free.
Oh, I did see that, but I read it differently. I didn't read the, yes, I did see that. So Sabin could be free, but I thought it was more of like, I don't know, the way I read it was more like, oh, we're just going to flip this coin and, then the winner can decide. But I thought that Edgar, if he had won the flip, was going to choose the same thing and let Sabin be free. That's how I read it. So I read the actual coin flip as being irrelevant, so I didn't really think of it as a coin flip scene.
I read it as, he didn't want Sabin to feel bad if he chose freedom and left his brother there to be the king.
Yeah, I guess so. I just didn't see it that way. But I mean, obviously now that you mention it, I do remember the coin flip. But because of how I interpreted it, I kind of canceled out the coin flip.
So speaking of scenes, what is one of the more memorable scenes in the bit you played so far?
Gosh, there was a lot of memorable scenes. Let me see. I really liked a lot of the scenes with, how do you pronounce the big general's name? Gestal and Kefka?
Are you talking about the general or the emperor?
The emperor.
Gestal, I think.
Gestal. So, and this is really great. Like I said, this game has a lot of really modern touches. In the beginning, I really was convinced that Kefka was going against the general and the empire wasn't bad. And Gestal was, didn't know what Kefka was doing and all these things. And I loved the scene in the beginning because I was like, okay, Kefka's the bad guy. And, he's ugly, so I guess he's got to be the bad guy in 1994.
Terrible.
No, but that's 1994 sensibilities, right?
Clowns need love, too.
So he's got to be the bad guy, and Gestal is not that bad. And I was really surprised when I saw the cutscene of Gestal literally dragging the Espers out of the Esper realm, because I had thought that he might have been the good guy. And it was really nice to see and to have my expectations overturned, because the only thing I'd ever heard about this game before I played it was that Kefka was the bad guy and he was real bad, but he was a cool character and that there was a cool opera scene. Those are the only things I've heard in passing. And I definitely was really surprised to see that Gestal was also the bad guy. So that made it much more sinister, the whole overarching plot. It's not like one rebel general. It was larger than that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of scenes also that stand out in my mind. And obviously the opera scene's probably my favorite scene in the game. But the scene when Kefka poisons the people of Doma and Cian with his family, and then later on when he sees them getting on the train, it actually still brings tears to my eyes thinking about this poor guy, watching his family die and then watching their spirits move on.
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty dramatic. I didn't get the same reaction because I really thought that whole train thing made very little sense. I didn't think that it was really well done. I thought that I have lots of trouble with this game because some of the scenes are so well done and then other things are so silly and unrealistic that they just seem to be at odds. This game is tonally awkward and tonally at odds with itself. There are lots of times where it's silly, but in a serious way, which doesn't make any sense to me.
Kefka says that like 100% perfectly.
Yeah. But I can understand that. I mean, there's lots of psychotic, crazy, bad people, but the whole scene with it's supposed to be dramatic, but it's a silly, literal train to the afterlife. It lost me on that. Now, the opposite of that was the opera scene, which I thought was fantastic. I thought the opera scene was really well done, even though, like a lot of things, I failed. I failed.
How did you fail? I didn't even know
I
you
didn't
could
know
fail.
I could fail either. And that's part of the problem. So when I got there, and it's like, oh, I'm going to read the score. I thought like a modern game, you wouldn't be able to fail. Like it would just be like, something cool would happen. Like if you did the exact same thing in an RPG from after 2010, what would happen. They would have an alternate sequence of events that would be maybe just as cool, but you wouldn't get as good of a reward, but something would happen. Instead, I was too slow because I didn't know where the balcony was that I was supposed to throw the flowers off of, and it just ended. And I had to start over. No, it wasn't game over. The guy's like, oh, well, we've got we could do the show again. It's the next day. Not, we still have the theater. I'm like, really?
It's great that Setzer waited to kidnap people.
Exactly. That was my whole thing. Like, wait, he's waiting to kidnap. Yeah. I love the scene. I thought it was fantastically well done. I just thought that it was really silly that you could fail it. I thought that something else would happen and it would take us down a different path. And I know that if we were playing this game that was made today, it would absolutely do that.
Well, I've read online and I'm under, the same boat where I hope they remake this game, but we'll see how Final Fantasy VII Remake turns out before I hope they remake, one of my favorite games of all time. Fingers crossed.
Wouldn't you rather, like, instead of remaking this game, to make a brand new RPG in the same kind of style with the same sensibilities?
No. Well, okay. I want both.
Because they already did.
I want both.
And you didn't play it.
I want both.
Yes, you can have both maybe someday.
Well, sadly, because I got much further than you in the 10 hours, all my other notes were about things you didn't get to. So I don't want to spoil things unless you're okay with it. But if I talk about it, you're not going to freaking know what I'm talking about anyways.
So let's talk about how this game holds up as a whole for anyone who didn't play it yet. Because then they can take a look at my 10 hours of experience coming into it fresh, and they can judge whether they want to play it for themselves.
Okay. So you're the fresh bee. Lay it on us.
I think this is a good game. I think that it is troubled. It has a lot of issues. I think that if it just had a little bit of tweaks, if the combat was a little less, if the combat occurred a little less often, but was a little bit more difficult when it was too easy, I think this would be a really easy game to recommend. But I think with the way it is, with the combat being tremendously uneven, where sometimes it's just face roll easy and other times it just wipes your whole party and you don't have any kind of warning between the two, I think that is like the biggest disadvantage of this game combined with the frequent combat. But the story is really good. The music is really good. The graphics are great. I thought the Android version, the graphics were fantastic. I understand people say, oh, they're blurry, oh, they're this. Sure, they don't look like the original pixel art graphics, but I think that they're still relevant and they still feel really good. I mean,
They grew on me too, so I feel
that. Yeah,
that.
They absolutely grew on you, and I think that they were a smart change from the original graphics, which I did play, like I said, the half an hour on the GBA, and I found that to be really good also. I just think this version overall was better. But with those couple of tweaks, I think it could be a really solid game. But for now, I'd probably not recommend anyone playing this unless they go into it eyes wide open about that. Because there are so many other games to play these days, and there's so many other options. But if you're a frequent traveler and you want to play it on your mobile device, maybe give it a shot.
That's tough that you don't recommend it like that. I mean, yeah, I can see it has a lot of bugs, but we both agree that it was the things that it does well, it definitely was ahead of its time. Scenarios and story and characters and things like that. Interestingly enough, I got to a part, and I'm not going to spoil it in case you want to play it, continue, that I didn't know there was another way to do this. And if you look at my notes, I'm like, holy shit, I didn't know this could happen. What the heck? I played this game 3 times now, and I had no clue. It's just interesting to me that you can play it again. And I actually had to Google it. Like, was this added later? And it wasn't. This was in the Super Nintendo version, but I had no clue that a scenario could change the way it did. And it's to the point where it kind of affects almost the entire narrative going forward.
That's pretty incredible that you learned something, 25 years later or 20 years later? That's awesome. I mean, that's really incredible that someone who's such an expert could learn something new. So, I mean, there's a lot to this game. We didn't even talk about like the siege where you control the multiple parties and you switch between them. Again, super innovative. So there's a ton of stuff here. I just hesitate to recommend it unless people come into it knowing in 2019 all the different issues that it has. I think it's a good game, and I definitely really enjoyed my time with it. There were times when I thought, wow, this is really fantastic stuff. And then there were times I was like, and I just want to throw my controller.
Oh my god, speaking of Siege, I totally forgot about this. I should have added it in with changes I noticed. So there are more things like that later in the game where you have to make different parties of your characters and actually explore dungeons together. Like different characters control different ways and open paths for other characters. Well, I remember in the Super Nintendo version, and I think the PlayStation version too, when this comes up, because they're so infrequent, your characters that you don't play do not level with your other characters. And of course, I had my 4 favorite, and I always played them, maybe subbing someone out once in a while. But there's 14 playable characters you can find and recruit in this game. Generally, you need all 14, and I would get to a place that, for example, are level 50 enemies, and I have 4 level 50s. And maybe everyone else was level 30, 35, maybe if I was lucky 40. But it was nice to look, and I noticed that the characters that I didn't use were actually leveling with the characters I used this time. So that would have saved so much headaches.
Oh, wow. I noticed that the characters that I wasn't playing were a certain level, but I didn't notice them leveling up because as soon as I met Gao, the beast kid, he went in the dumpster and I never talked to him again.
He's my monster boy, but I never used him either. His abilities are kind of whack.
Yeah, he didn't seem like he was very much fun. So if someone was coming to this brand new Kalisa, would you recommend this to someone today in 2019?
Brand new? How old are they?
How old are they? If they're
like you and never played it,
old.
Jesus.
Yes, if they're 43 years old.
Yes, go play it. You should have
fan,
played it a long time ago, dummy.
Yeah, well, would you recommend it to someone like me?
It's tough because I feel like, I was shocked you never played it. I feel like if you like RPGs, especially of JRPGs, you should have already played it before. And if not, even with the bugs, I think it's a great game to play. I think you're losing out if you don't experience this game, even with the flaws. I think the game is better than the flaws.
Absolutely, but that's why we're doing this podcast. Because between the two of us, right, we have a combined 60 years of RPG playing. But now we have a list of 100 RPGs that one of us has played and the other one has not.
Which is interesting because most of your games are on PC and most of my games are on Super Nintendo up to PlayStation 1.
Well, I think the biggest difference is most of my games are really good and most of your games are good.
You just lost more fans. Congrats.
Final Fantasy VI is a good game, though.
PureBlueOctopus@gmail.com. You can email her your hate right now.
Or you can tweet at me on Twitter at PureBlueOctopus. But yeah, absolutely. Please, what is your final verdict? Should someone coming to this play it? Now, I think it's really valid for historical purposes, and it's really good to know where things went, because for me, having played Final Fantasy V back in the day, which I saw it coming in this direction, I can see Final Fantasy VI as the exact bridge to obviously the really popular Final Fantasy VII and beyond. So, I can see that, and I see its historical importance. And now I feel after 10 hours of playing it, I understand, but I'm not sure that I can continue playing it because I don't think it's worth it. I think there's so many other games out there. What do you think?
You already heard what I think. I think you're crazy. I think if you out there, people who never played this game, if you say you like RPGs, especially JRPGs, if you haven't played it, I will call you a dummy head too.
Yeah, well, I guess that's our...
You can email me hate at kalisaspirit@gmail.com. Bring it.
Yeah, send her some tweets and some emails telling her how silly she is, because the next episode, we're going to talk about one of the best Western RPGs ever created.
So you say.
By the legendary developers, BioWare. One of my absolute favorite games of all time. It's none other than the legendary Mass Effect, which this supposed RPG lover absolutely loves.
JRPG lover, let's specify. I play Western RPGs, but mostly JRPGs. And you know that I suck at shooting. That's why I never played it.
What shooting game did you recently put like 50 hours into? Was that The Division?
We're not talking about non-RPGs.
And what game did I catch you playing like 2 weeks ago? The Destiny?
We're not talking about non-kind of RPGs.
So she plays them. She just didn't play this one.
You never even mentioned the last shooting game I played, so that's good.
Oh, The Outer Worlds? I mean, come on. If you play The Outer Worlds, you gotta play Mass Effect. It's like the proto-child. Anyways, thank you very much. You want to take us out, Kalisa?
Well, thank you for listening, guys. And as Pierre said, next episode will be, well, I will be forced to play Mass Effect, and let's see if I can get through it without pulling my hair out. This is Kalisa. Have a good night.
And this is Pure Blue Octopus. Have a great night.